Well, would you look at that? Super Mario Land was finally added to the Nintendo Switch Online service after a year and a half, I think. And boy howdy, it's about time, Nintendo. I'm shocked it took them this long, considering it's one of the most important games probably released for the system, as well as one of the 5 launch titles that they made for the Game Boy. And it's kind of comical seeing a bunch of these other games that a lot of people haven't heard of before this game got added. So I don't know, that's kind of a laugh, I guess, but still, damn. Kind of makes you think people don't like this game if it took Nintendo this long to add it to the service. And if you thought that, yeah, you're kind of right. A lot of people do not like this game. Like, at all. A lot of people vastly prefer 2. They say 2 is just a much better game in every way. You know, Land 1 is primitive for its time. It's not worth playing anymore. It's so clunky, you know, all this crap that they spew on the game. And this has especially risen since it got added to the Nintendo Switch Online service. And I have noticed an alarming amount of people say this about the game. Like, I actually saw more negativity for Land 1 than I did positivity. So that was interesting. And whatever. I'm not here to change your opinion. That's fair. We all have them. Whatever. If you don't like Land 1, I'm by no means trying to force you to change your mind and all that. But fuck you. I think this game is good. As a matter of fact, I would even say it's one of Mario's best titles in the retro era. I would even say I like it more than Mario 1, and I would even go as far as to say that I considerably prefer this game over its sequel. I'm not baiting. That's genuinely what I think. But, you know, in this video, I'm more so gonna go over why I think this is just a good game, rather than just saying, oh, another game is worse. You know, maybe Land 2 can be saved for another time, because I have some things to say about that one. But that's for another time. For now, let's talk about why I think Super Mario Land 1 is a great video game. Let's start off with the thing that, like, everybody critiques when it comes to this game, even if they like it, and this alone kind of turns the game off for so many people. It's the controls. And I don't think they ruin the game, not even close, but to a degree, I can understand the problem with them. And I think a large reason for it is because it sort of lacks the momentum-based gameplay that you got out of Mario 1 and Mario 3, which was out of Japan at the time. In Mario Land, you don't really get any of that, like, control over your character. Like, if you start moving, then you'll slowly accelerate to that speed in that direction, right? Yeah, there's none of that in Mario Land 1. You go forward, and you're at top speed, like, near immediately. Like, it's pretty instant. And, you know, jumping with these physics can be kind of a chore, because it's like, oh god, where is my character going? He just suddenly started moving that way, or he suddenly started moving that way, right? I think there is a bit of a learning curve to how this game controls, and I do understand why that alone might turn this game off. I definitely get that. But I'm gonna keep it $100 with y'all. I think it eventually just gets to a point where you have a skill issue, because I really don't think they're that bad. I actually think they're pretty nice feeling once you get a grasp of how the game plays. And this actually seems like a perfect gateway into the level design already, because honestly, this is kind of the reason why I've grown to tolerate these controls quite a bit. And while it may not follow the philosophy of Mario 1 when it comes to its momentum-based controls, it absolutely follows the philosophy of Mario 1 when it comes to its level design. Because essentially all it is just a bunch of obstacles that you need to maneuver over, or dodge, or jump over, right? It's not really that much more complicated than that usually. I think Land 1 does go a little bit more above and beyond with its like gimmicks and its obstacles that it has, so it's sort of like a a Mario 3, Mario 1 hybrid, sort of, kind of. I think more so Mario 1 in this regard, because, you know, it's still just, at the end of the day, you're going forward from point A to point B. There's no, like, flight power-ups that you can go to access different secrets. There's no secret exits or anything. It's literally just go forward. Go to the end within the time limit. And also you can't scroll back because it's Mario 1. And honestly, that kind of helps me appreciate the controls because while you don't have much momentum, you have a lot of speed that you can gain in this game. And in general, I think its tight and clunky nature actually kind of allows for some very satisfying, tight gameplay. This game just allows you to just plow through enemies and obstacles if you're good enough at the game. And this especially becomes all the more satisfying in the later levels, which are supposed to be harder. Also, I'll just come right out and say it now. I think this game is not that hard. As a matter of fact, I think for the most part, it's actually pretty simple once you get used to the game. But I mean, it's still never what I would call too easy. Like, you always do have to put in effort. You do always kind of have to think about what you're doing before you do it. It's a game where you can't really zone out, because then you might accidentally make a mistake, and that, trust me, is very easy to do in this game because of the physics. But in that respect, it kind of makes the game more fun because it's forcing you to focus more on not messing up. And this is actually an idea that I feel is carried over to lots of other games with clunky controls. Staying within the Mario franchise here, there's also Super Mario Kart, which is also looked at as primitive and clunky and not worth playing today. As primitive as it may be for the time, I think that this kind of game design unintentionally makes the game more interesting in that regard, because it makes it so that you can't really zone out. You always have to pay attention to what you're doing at all times, and that's something that I really like in a game. Because when you play a game that you're so good at, or even if you're playing a game that's like so easy, to the point where you just kind of start zoning out because you can do it so casually, in my opinion, that's kind of less fun because you're doing it so easily, and the challenge that you're being given is easily overcome. And then the next challenge is easily overcome. And it's like you're beating challenges without even probably realizing you're beating challenges. You're just doing them, right? Well, Super Mario Land isn't quite like that. Like, you do have to pay attention. You do have to kind of monitor what you're doing. It's not what I would call a hard game, but it is one where you need to be kind of cautious of your mistakes. And I think Super Mario Land does that wonderfully. And like I said, the speed of the physics in this game makes doing all of this so much more satisfying once you finally get good at the game and understand the mechanics. Now let's talk about some other design that I think this game does really well. Goal towers. You know those little flagpoles at the end of like every Mario game, right? You just get to the top of them and you get a 1-up or something, right? Well, in Mario Land, it's kind of like that, where you're going to the top of a tower, but to get there, you need to do this like little obstacle course to reach the top, but usually you only have one try at this. So if you fail it, well, tough, you're going to the bottom and you do not get a bonus game. But if you make it to the top and you understand the controls, but monitor them carefully so you don't mess them up, then you make it to the top and you get a bonus game. And you could get some 1-ups, usually it's 1-ups because it takes 3 of the slots out of 4. And then the 4th slot is just a Super Ball flower, which we'll get to later. But honestly, this is one of the best goals I've ever seen in a Mario game. Genuinely, I'm not kidding. I think this kind of goal system is genius. And heck, I would even say that this goal system might not work as well in any other Mario game, because usually they're far easier to control than in Land 1. But in this game's special case of having clunky controls, it actually gives the player a challenge to sort of watch what they're doing if they want that bonus game. Like, yeah, you're probably not going to get every bonus game on your first run because you might not have a grasp on the controls yet. But because of this game being so short, you can replay it and get better and better at it. And thus, as well as getting better at the level design, you can also get better at just reaching the top of the gold towers. And I think this kind of design is great for beginners. And heck, even if you kind of overload yourself with lives since you're being so good at the game at this point, well, it's still satisfying to get to the top of that gold tower, right? Because it actually does feel earned. It feels like you actually did get good at this game. But now let's discuss the elephant in the room when it comes to Land 1's level design. It's the Marine Pop and Sky Pop levels, and these only take up 2 out of the 12 levels in this game, so they're very minor. But despite these being different vehicles that Mario drives in his respective levels, they function identically. Basically, this is an auto-scroller shooter level where, you just shoot at an enemy coming your way, you might shoot at some blocks to clear a path, or even just because, or even to get a power-up or a 1-up or anything like that, which is cool, right? But, these are pretty easy because you can kind of just hold down the A button to rapidly shoot, and there's no cap to this, so you can kind of just clear loads of enemies without even trying. Heck, even the bosses are actually pretty easy once you learn their pattern. I'm even talking about Tatanga. Like, genuinely, he's a pretty easy fight once you get the hang of it. I actually forgot to mention this, but I actually really like how Mario 1 handled the boss fights, and I think Mario Land 1 here doesn't disappoint either, because they're literally just obstacles. You jump over them, and there you go. You're not disrupting the flow of the game at all, like a lot of other 2D Mario boss fights. But here, you just jump over them, and there you go, you win. No flow is lost. Sure, it might not be as much of a fight, but you can at least admit it does a good job at keeping the pace, right? But yeah, anyway, back to the Marine Pop and Sky Pop levels. I got a bit off topic there. Yeah, these are probably just my least favorite levels in the game, and it's mainly just due to how not challenging they are, because it's very easy to play, unlike the platforming levels, and it's like these levels are still okay. I think they're still entertaining, and they give you enough to do to keep it interesting. But I just think in terms of this game's strongest design, I think these are the weakest levels in the game. But honestly, if these are the weakest levels in the game, I think that's a sign of a great game, because even these levels are really not that bad. I'd never mind playing these, I just think the platforming levels are better. And I am certainly glad that there are more of those in this game. Alright, now let's talk about the Super Ball Flower as my final unique mechanic found in Land 1. And a lot of people do not like this power-up for very understandable reasons. It's basically just a shittier Fire Flower. And what I mean by that is that it still functions like a Fire Flower, like you can shoot a projectile right in front of you, but it doesn't travel like a fireball does. Instead, you shoot super balls, which actually ricochet off grounds at a 90-degree angle, and they'll just bounce all over the place in this kind of way until they decide to disappear or they connect with an enemy. I don't hate this power-up, but I do understand why people aren't crazy about it, because, yeah, it is kind of just a shittier Fire Flower in the grand scheme of things. Like, it's a little harder to get your shots in, but, I think that's kind of cool that you kind of have to strategize more with it. Heck, you can even ricochet it off the ground or off the walls into enemies, and I actually think that's really satisfying to do if you, do it correctly. But, I can understand why that might be a hassle to pull off for newcomers, so I totally get that. But honestly, I'm fine with the Super Ball Flower. I have zero problems with it. I think it's fine. My only real complaint with it, though, is that there could have been an indicator that you have that power-up, because Mario's sprite does not change whatsoever. Heck, even Land 2 Fire Mario had the little feather above his head. So I don't know, maybe something, just even if it was 1 pixel would have been helpful. And now is when we talk about hard mode. And do I like hard mode? Yes, absolutely. Although I do kinda wish you didn't have to beat the main game just to get it. But whatever, I love hard mode. Just make a restore point on Switch Online or a save state on emulator if you're using it. Whatever, it doesn't matter to me. If you beat the game, you beat the game. You get hard mode. But yeah, it basically just enhances everything I just talked about regarding Land 1's very fun gameplay, and just makes it more challenging and therefore even more fun. Now, I'm not saying it's anything like that spectacular, you're really just playing Land 1 again, but it's a more challenging version of the game, and if you like challenge, then there you go, it's hard mode. I think it's cool. So, yeah, I think this is an overall great video game. It's very short, I understand why people might be turned off by its length, but honestly, I don't really have a problem with short games as long as they're really fun to play, and especially if they're accessible. And Super Mario Land is hands down one of the most accessible and replayable Mario games. Like, definitely. 100%. And also as a neat little bonus round, let's talk about the presentation, and, I mean, yeah, what do you expect? Of course the game looks like this. It's in 1989. I don't think it's that big of a deal, but is it particularly great by today's standards? No. But you know, I think it's charming for the time. But the soundtrack, on the other hand, is spectacular. And I think this is one of the few aspects that pretty much most of everybody agrees on, is that Mario Land's soundtrack is phenomenal, specifically for the time. It's a listen, man. This game genuinely has one of my favorite soundtracks, at least in the retro era. Maybe even 2D Mario as a whole, like genuinely. And even if I don't want to hear the in-game songs outside of the game all the time, plenty of remixes that are fantastic, and I think you should give a listen. And also going back to the presentation, I just think it's pretty neat that the worlds are based on real-life locations. I just think that's pretty neat. And before we end this video, I want to quickly go over some fan works of Super Mario Land that have been made to enhance the overall experience, or just make something cool in general. And I'd say if you're just into playing the authentic Super Mario Land experience without it changing too much of the game, well, if you're into emulation and or ROM hacking, then I highly recommend the ROM hack called Super Mario Land DX. This hack was made by toruzz, I am sorry if I'm saying that wrong, and it gives you some neat little features, like it allows you to select hard mode right at the start. It allows you to play as Mario or Luigi, so if you want to be Luigi rescuing Princess Daisy, you can certainly do that. And you can even upgrade the graphics to look more modern, or even just keep the retro style if you're into that. And there's plenty of other changes, like tons of graphic enhancements that just make the game look much better than it did previously. So even if after all this you're not fond of the original's graphics, then just play this one, man. It's so cool, dude. And this person did the same for Super Mario Land 2 many years back before this one was made, so of course go check that one out too if you're interested in playing Mario Land 2 while keeping the authentic style. Now as far as remakes go, there's actually quite a bit to talk about here. So first let's talk about New Super Mario Land, which is an extremely impressive, from-the-ground-up remake of Super Mario Land for the Super Nintendo, released in 2019. Which is pretty cool. Like, come on, that is awesome. The fact that he took time to remake this entire game and put it into the new Super Mario Bros. Style is honestly really cool. It even gives us some new Super Mario Bros. Like, sort of movesets here. Like, it allows you to wall jump and even ground pound. So, you know, just some quality of life improvements there, and if you didn't like the controls I think feel much more at home, but also don't take away from what made Super Mario Land feel so good to control in the first place. Now, I personally don't prefer this over the original because I actually feel that it's quite a bit easier now, but nonetheless, this is still really cool. And this is way better than anything I could ever do, so if you're interested in supporting this guy and just playing this game, do it. It's really good. And this isn't a ROM hack or anything, this is just straight up its standalone ROM. There's also Super Mario Land Remix, which is currently a fan game made for computers. It's trying to update Super Mario Land also in the Super Nintendo style, but also just add some stuff like multiplayer and heck, even collectibles in the levels. Now, I haven't spent a ton of time on this one, only because I really suck at using keyboard controls, which is something the previous two games I have not had a problem with. One thing I'd recommend for them is to add controller support, because that would be amazing if they could do that. But controller support or not, this is a cool project, and I recommend you check it out. And lastly, let's talk about the new Super Mario All-Stars HD remake. It is my last video, so I might as well boot it up again and just beat Super Mario Land with it. And that I did, technically. But yeah, you're probably seeing now on screen that this is a very poorly put together remake of the game. This collection actually has a lot of poorly put together remakes, and Land isn't exactly an exception. Like, the bosses are just straight up PNGs that just move up and down. As far as I'm concerned, some of them don't even have a freaking hitbox, which is really funny. I mean, it kind of is, at the end of the day, just Super Mario Land put into New Super Mario Bros. Wii's engine, or should I say newer Super Mario Bros. Wii's engine, since this is what this entire hack was built off of, that one mod. So it's just kind of sluggishly putting together assets from that mod into Super Mario Land, and it doesn't always work, like, at all, and some of the music is god-awful, like, oh my god. It's actually kind of funny how bad the bonus room music is, but, you know, then they just borrow random remixes off YouTube. They use the Brawl Eastern Kingdom remix. It's that kind of game where they're just kind of, you know, slapping shit together and just seeing what works, and they just make that a game. The one thing I really want to point out with this remake is that the shooter levels are substantially worse in this version. They are so fucking slow. Dreadfully slow. Like, even for auto-scroller standards, and they are god-awful. Not even just for the auto-scrollers. It's using that, like, final clown car mechanic in newer Super Mario Bros. Wii and basically making this the shooter level, but without any of what made that level interesting, like, whatsoever. Like, for example, you can't even grab any coins. You can grab star coins, but you can't grab coins. You can shoot, like, one cannon every 500 seconds, so that's cool, I guess. But you can only destroy blocks with it, and you can't even destroy enemies with it, and the bosses are god-awful, like I already said. Like, they're straight up just PNGs. Especially the last shooter level, like the freaking Sky Pop level. Good God. Good living God. They honestly could have trimmed this down if they were going to make it this slow. It's unbearable. Oh, it is so awful, dude. You know what? You might as well just play 4-2 if you're gonna play this version. I don't recommend it unless you're looking for a guilty pleasure game. Because I'll admit, it's kind of a guilty pleasure of mine. But if you're gonna play this at all, just stop at 4-2. You don't need to play 4-3, especially since the game doesn't actually finish. They never put that in there. So once you get to Tatanga, the game's just kind of over. There's no progressing past that, to my knowledge. So no PNG of Daisy, sadly, but, you know. Sometimes life is tough. Oh yeah, there's star coins too, but you don't need to bother with those. It's fine. Don't worry about those. They're not even well put together anyway. You'll collect the second one before the first one. It's like, yeah, just don't bother with those. They're not important. They don't mean anything at all. So yeah, I just covered a great game with a lot of great ways to play it in New Super Mario All-Stars HD. I'm actually thinking of making this commentary series, well, a series, because I've wanted to do this kind of thing for a while now, and I figured this was kind of my opening. So I figured, since this topic was kind of sparking up a little bit recently, I figured, you know what? Let's do it. I want to talk about a game that's good. But also just keep in mind that I'm not gonna cover every game in a negative light. Like, I'm going to remain optimistic for most of the games I cover, unless I have something very interesting to say about one game in particular. But, you know, that's not really the vibe I'm going for with this. I kind of prefer positivity more than anything else. But yeah, if you have any ideas of what I could do for a commentary, let me know in the comments down below, and I might consider it. Who knows? Until then, play Super Mario Land. Because I said so. Sayonara. It's kind of just sluggishly putting together